Most welcome in this video lecture. In this video lecture, I am going to deal with function of criticism by T.S. Eliot. Before I take up the essay function of criticism, I would like to introduce the author briefly. T.S. Eliot is a versatile genius. He is one of the greatest literary figure of 20th century. He has practiced all the three genres poetry, criticism, and drama with great competency. He was a classicist in literature as he strengthened reaction against romanticism. Tradition and individual talent may be regarded as an unofficial manifesto of his critical creed, for it contains almost all his critical principles. He is innovative in poetic creation as well. He is originator of objective poetry and laid down the theory of impersonality. He is also experimental in dramatic composition as well, both in form and content, well exemplified in his drama Murder in the Cathedral. His essay, Function of Criticism, has this setup. The essay is divided into four parts. It was published in 1923 on account of controversy of his essay Tradition and Individual Talent, published in 1919. Middleton Murry challenged his opinion in his essay Romanticism and Tradition. The present essay is a reply to Murray. The first part takes into account Eliot's views expressed in essay Tradition and Individual Talent. In the second part, brief account of Murray's views are given. In the third part, Murray's views are dismissed. In the fourth and the concluding part, Eliot examines different aspects of nature and function of criticism. In this video lecture, I am going to take up these topics one by one. Eliot's dynamic concept of tradition, definition of criticism and its end, on the need of cooperation and conformity, Murray's view on basic, classic, and romantic, Eliot's rejection of Murray's opinion, Eliot as critical of inner voice, Eliot on criticism and creative faculty, Eliot's views on creative criticism, qualification of an ideal critic, Eliot on sense of fact, Eliot on tools of critic, Eliot's warning against fact hunting, Eliot's warning against lemon squeezing, Eliot's originality, scientific attitude. I will take up these components one by one subsequently. Now I am going to take up Eliot's dynamic concept of tradition. He begins the essay by referring tradition and individual talent as it is relevant to deal with the present essay. In this essay, he points out the intimate relation between the present and the past in the world literature. The literature of Europe from Homer down to the present age form a single literary tradition. Individual writers and individual work of art have their significance in relation to this tradition. Eliot believes that the past is not dead but lives on in the present. Past is altered by the present as much as the present is directed by the past. Past literature form an ideal order, but this order is disturbed with the arrival of every new work of art. Might be slightly. With the arrival of every new work of art, there is readjustment of values between the old and the new. Literary tradition is constantly changing and grows different from age to age. Definition of criticism and its end. Eliot's views on criticism is derived from his views on tradition. He defines criticism as the commentation and exposition of works of art by means of written words. Criticism can never be autolytic because it is always about something. According to Matthew Arnold, art may have some other ends, is that moral, religious, cultural, but art need not to be aware of these ends. Rather, it performs its function by being indifferent to such ends. Eliot, rejecting Arnold's views, laid down that criticism always has one and only one definite end, which is elucidation of work of art and the correction of text. In Frontiers of Criticism, Eliot further explains the aim of criticism as the promotion of understanding and enjoyment of literature, on the need of cooperation and conformity. As the end of criticism is clear, so it is easy to consider whether critic has performed his function or not. But it is not easy to determine because critics, instead of trying to discipline their personal prejudices and whims, record their differences with as many of their fellow critics as possible and cooperating in the common pursuit of judgment, express extreme views claiming their individuality, and they differ from one another. This is so because they owe their livelihood to such differences and oddities. As a result, criticism has become like a Sunday park, full of orators competing with one another. Such critics are worthless and have no value and significance. However, there are some other critics who are useful, and it is on the basis of their works that Eliot establishes aims and method of criticism which should be followed by all. Murray's views on classic and romantic. In the second part of the essay, Eliot takes into consideration Middleton Murray's views on classicism and romanticism. Murray takes a definite position against critics who consider that the classicism and romanticism are the same thing and says that there cannot be classic and romantic at one and the same time. At this end, and Eliot has praised Murray's stand on classicism and romanticism. But Eliot does not agree with him when he makes the issue a national and racial issue and remarks that the genius of French is classic and that of English is romantic. Murray further relates Catholicism in religion with classicism in literature as both believe in tradition, in discipline, in obedience to authority outside the individual. On the contrary, he takes up Romanticism and Protestantism and social liberalism as related with one another, for they have full faith in inner voice in the individual and obey no outside authority. They are for no rules and tradition. Eliot's rejection of Murray's opinion. Eliot does not agree with Murray's view. In his opinion, the difference between classicism and romanticism is difference between complete and fragmentary, the mature and immature, the orderly and chaotic. To him, the concept of inner voice is a sign of indiscipline leading to vanity, fear, and lust. Neither does he agree with the view that English as nation are romantic, while French as classical. Eliot as critical of inner voice. In the third part of the essay, Eliot dismisses Murray's view in light ridicule. He satirically calls inner voice vigary. Those who believe in inner voice, for them, criticism is of no value. For function of criticism is to discover some common principles for achieving perfection in art. Those who believe in inner voice do not want any principles and do not care for perfection in art, which can only result with obedience to the laws of art and tradition. Eliot on criticism and creative faculty. In the, in the fourth part of the essay, Eliot deals with the problem of criticism and different aspects related to it. In the beginning, he comments on critical and creative and criticizes Matthew Arnold for his cursory distinction between the critical and creative activity. Arnold does not realize that criticism is of great significance in the work of creation. As a result, the larger part of the labor of an author is in composing his work is critical labor. The labor of sifting, combining, constructing, expunging, correcting, testing. Eliot further expresses the view that the criticism employed by a writer on his work is the most vital and highest kind of criticism. Elsewhere, Eliot has called such criticism as workshop criticism. High worth and value of workshop criticism cannot be denied for a poet who knows from personal experience the mysteries of the creative process, is in better position to write about it than those who have no such knowledge. Eliot goes on saying that some creative writers are superior to others only because their critical faculty is superior. He ridiculed those who denounce the critical labor of the artist and believes that the greater artist is an unconscious artist. Eliot calls such concepts vigary and ridicule on such people. He remarks about those who, instead of relying on the inner voice or inspiration, conform to tradition and in this way try to make their work as free from defects as possible. Eliot's views on creative criticism. Eliot believes that it is mistake to separate critical and creative activities. To a great extent, creation is in reality is criticism. But critical writing cannot be creative. There can be no creative criticism. Creative criticism is neither criticism nor creation. This is so because there is no basic difference between creation and criticism. Creation of a work of art is autotelic. It has no conscious aim and objectives. Criticism, on the other hand, is always about something other than itself. It is not autotelic. Its aim is commentation and elucidation of work of art. As a result, we cannot fuse certain creation with criticism as we fuse criticism with creation. The critical activities find its fulfillment when it is fused with creation, with the labor of the artist. An ideal critic, qualification of an ideal critic. An ideal critic must have a highly developed sense of fact. It is a rare gift. It is not frequently met with and very slow to develop. The value of works of criticism, that of a poet on his own art, lies in the fact that he is dealing with the fact which he understands and so can also help us to understand them. Eliot's own criticism is such workshop criticism, and Eliot praises such critics and their criticism. There is a large part of criticism which seeks to interpret an author and his work, but most of such interpretation is not interpretation at all. It is mere fiction. The critic gives his views, his impression of the work, and so is false and misleading. Eliot is against such impressionistic criticism, as it gives us no insight into the work under study. Eliot's sense of fact. True interpretation is no interpretation at all. It is merely putting the reader in position of facts which he might have missed otherwise. True critic himself knows the facts about a work of art, its conditions, its settings, its genesis, and put them before his reader in a simple and easy manner. Thus, it is clear that by facts, Eliot means the various technical aspects of work of art. Eliot on tools of the critic. Comparison and analysis are the chief tools of critic, and he must use with care and intelligence. Comparison and analysis can be possible only when the critic knows the facts about the works which are to be compared and analyzed. He must know the facts about work of art and technical elements like its structure, content, and theme, and not waste time in irrelevant fact hunting. However, the method of comparison and analysis, even when used unjudiciously, is preferable to interpretation in the conventional sense. Eliot's warning against fact hunting. Facts, even facts of the lowest order, cannot corrupt taste, while impressionistic criticism, like that of Coleridge and Goethe, is always misleading. The function of criticism is to elucidate taste, as Eliot puts it, to promote enjoyment and understanding of literature. Facts, however trivial, can never corrupt taste. They can only gratify taste. In the end, Eliot cautions not to become slave to facts, warning against lemon squeezing. Eliot's emphasis on facts makes him stand with such critics as F.R. Lewis and I.A. Richards. He comments textual criticism, but he is against lemon squeezer school of critics who try to squeeze every drop of meaning out of words. A critic should concentrate on the text, compare and analysis, but he should never stoop to trivialities or empty hair splitting. A good critic is objective. His judgment is based on the facts. He is guided by tradition, accumulated wisdom of ages, and not by his inner voice. Eliot is against impressionistic criticism, but he does not lay down any rules or principles. According to Eliot, impressionistic criticism is erratic, while adherence to rigid theories hampers the critic and curtails his freedom. Eliot's originality, scientific attitude. Critics should be guided by facts and facts alone. He should approach the work of art with free mind, unprejudiced by any theories or preconceived notions. Only then he can be completely objective and impersonal. It is in this way that criticism stands nearer to science. It is in this way criticism becomes a cooperative activity. The critic of one age cooperates with the critics of previous ages in common pursuit of truth. Such truths are provisional, for truths of one age are likely to be modified and corrected by truths discovered by future ages. In this objective scientific attitude, Eliot is different from all other previous English critics, and in it lies his individuality and originality. Eliot is like a scientist working with open mind and cooperating with others for the realization of truth. That is all in this video. Thanks for watching.